So welcome to our panel discussion on this last day of the global conference. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie O'Reilly. I'm Executive Director of Business and Program Development with the Milken Institute. And we're here this morning to discuss how American business is shaping and has been shaping the gay rights debate in the US. We're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of the panel, so hopefully you'll all participate in that. But right now we're going to jump in. I'm going to introduce my wonderfully esteemed group of panelists who are joining us. So Richard Socarides is on the end. He is head of public affairs for GLG and formerly of the Clinton administration. Matthew Winkler is editor-in-chief emeritus of Bloomberg News, the global news service he founded with Michael Bloomberg back in 1990. Nicole Dulett is head of LGBT strategy and product innovation for Credit Suisse's private banking and wealth management new markets division. And right to my right is Dustin Lance Black, who is an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, producer, director, and social activist. So thank you all for being here. Okay, so Richard, I'm going to start with you. So earlier this month, Indiana passed their Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which essentially said that businesses may choose to serve or not serve whomever they please. It was met with a lot of criticism and backlash from US businesses. And then Arkansas had a similar bill proposed, which their governor refused to sign. Many say because of the difficulties his counterpart had in Indiana. They're both Republican governors, interestingly. And then yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments again in the same-sex marriage debate. And many expect it to come back favorably for supporters of same-sex marriages. So you've had a long career working on this issue. So give us a little bit of context. Tell us about this moment in time. How did we get here?
Okay, well, thank you. And first of all, I want to say thanks to you, Katie, and thanks to Milken for doing this panel on this really important issue, especially in this context. And we're happy to be here. And congratulations on a great couple of days. We've all had a great experience, I think. I think, as you're right, I mean, this is an important moment politically in terms of where we are as a country on this issue. And it is also an important moment in terms of where the business community is now on this issue of LGBT rights and how it got to this point, how we got to this point first as a country and more importantly, how we got to this point as a business community, this being a business conference, is pretty interesting. Many people, I think most people who aren't in the gay rights movement themselves, their first reaction to this moment is like, boy, this all happened so fast. And it just like seemed overnight, right? You blinked your eyes and everybody was for gay rights, right? Everybody was for gay marriage. It was a foregone conclusion. I think the truth is that we have to remember that it took a lot of work by a lot of people over many, many years. People have been working in the gay rights movement for decades, certainly longer than 50 years. And so while it seems like public opinion has moved very quickly towards the end of this struggle, a lot of the foundational work was being done 50 years ago. And so it didn't really quite happen so fast. But the arguments yesterday in the Supreme Court on gay marriage were the culmination of political work over many decades. And I think while we saw that it is a closely divided court, we're quite hopeful. I mean, those of us who are involved in it from a gay rights perspective, we're quite hopeful that we will get at least a 5-4 decision saying that the Constitution guarantees the right to same-sex marriage to every person, to every LGBT, gay or lesbian person, no matter where you live. And we think we're going to see that decision at the end of June. Now, in terms of the role that business played in this, I wrote a piece for the New Yorker in advance of the conference just a couple of days ago, and it seemed to me that the first movers in this really were the business of Hollywood and the business of show business. And when I was in the Clinton administration in the early 90s, when we looked to American business to become active in gay rights, the only people who really wanted to participate with us was Hollywood. Then the tech community, long known as innovators, were very quickly in there also. Apple, companies like Apple were the very first to protect gay employees with their policies, but also to be willing to speak publicly on gay rights. The next thing, I think the next big thing that happened, obviously summarizing a lot of history in a very short period of time, but was that we saw a lot of activity in Wall Street, within the Wall Street and financial community. And that was especially around the effort to get marriage equality in New York. Matt's friend and colleague and boss, Mike Bloomberg, played a very crucial role. He was mayor of New York at the time. New York State passed that. And I think when Mike Bloomberg came out for gay marriage, people really took notice, and people in the political community, but especially people in the financial community. And a lot of people came in behind that, and that was really a defining moment for the business community. A lot came after that. And then most recently in those examples you cited, Indiana, Arkansas, we saw Walmart. There's no more traditional mainstream company, the #1 company in America in terms of size, playing a very active role in Indiana and Arkansas, where they're located. So it was kind of a real sweep of history, but I think that's a little bit of the chronology.
Right. Okay. So let's go to Bloomberg, because you mentioned Wall Street and the role of Wall Street. So Bloomberg, it operates in 72 countries, I think, with 150 bureaus, publishing approximately 5,000 stories a day. So you've been in the industry a long time, Matthew. Talk about how you've seen this issue evolving over time in terms of coverage, in terms of discussion within the business community.
Well, from our infancy in 1990, we actually were, as a news organization, the sponsor of gay and lesbian rights. Early on, one of our colleague leaders was Jonathan Capehart, who was a very visible person on this issue, and he was in our news department and kind of led from within a very visible and focused effort to make this issue prominent for us. And he's still at it, I think, with the Washington Post now. A point that was made earlier about what was kind of the, if you like, the culminating point. My colleague Lisa Kastnauer, who has been more active and dedicated on really human rights, but particularly creating gender balance in the workforce, was a reporter covering Wall Street in 2006. And she wrote really, I think, a definitive piece about gays no longer missing the best jobs at the Wall Street firms. And it was a really deep dive into how much Wall Street had been transformed. And that's really sort of the best measure, if you like, of how far we had come, was that it wasn't just civil rights granted, it was that pay was now equal across the board. And in her reporting, she showed that 19 financial companies received a 100% score based on the policies aimed at creating equitable rules on the street. But the issue doesn't go away. Coast to coast, north to south, Walmart gets a lot of attention, but Procter & Gamble, as early as 1992 was kind of on record as on this issue, but it really didn't become addressed prominently until much later than that. And Cincinnati today has done like a 180-degree transformation. It used to be a city that was very hostile to gay and lesbian rights. And the interesting thing is that, and I think the reason why this is all coming together is because business realizes how bad for business it is to discriminate. Discrimination is bad for business, and it doesn't matter, where you are. It's just a non-starter, to say the least. And Cincinnati is as good an example of the transformation in America. It's interesting that it's right next to Indiana. The interesting thing about Indiana is just as they're passing this law, all kinds of economic measures of performance are deteriorating in Indiana. So they just picked the worst possible time to go at it, and the fact that business was so vociferous on this issue tells you a lot about how far we've come.
Right, absolutely. So we're going to come back to that issue of culture, because I think she did a great job in that piece of really diving deep into that and what it's like inside these firms. But Nicole, I want to go to you because Matthew mentioned a bit about the index and how you've actually created investment opportunities for people around this. Can you talk about what Credit Suisse is doing and why
Yes.
it's so important for business?
Absolutely. So Credit Suisse, first I've been at Credit Suisse for 14 years. I personally wasn't out at Credit Suisse when I joined. I wasn't out in my personal life either. But one of the things that I've been working on since coming out is I've been very active in our LGBT employee resource group. We were the first Wall Street firm to create an employee resource group for the LGBT employees at CS back in 2000. And so as we've evolved as an internal organization, initially the first few things we were trying to do was get same-sex domestic partnership benefits internally. And as we achieved those goals, our mission evolved. And we started thinking, okay, how can we make more of an impact? We're a financial institution. We know the markets really well. Can we create some sort of a financial product that would allow our clients to use their investment dollars to support LGBT rights? And so in 2013, we launched the first ever LGBT Equity Index. So it's the Credit Suisse LGBT Equality Index. We modeled it after the S&P 500 because I really wanted to create a data set that could be compared to the S&P 500 on an apples-to-apples basis. So in order to be included in our LGBT index, companies have to score 80 or higher on the measurement that Matthew mentioned, which is the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index. So there's about 240 constituents in the LGBT index, and the correlation of daily returns with the S&P 500 is over 99%. So to me, that's really powerful. Corporations in the U.S. are going to spend over $1 billion this year just in navigating the legal patchwork of administering same-sex partner benefits, because certain states allow same-sex couples to be married, and certain benefits are administered on the state level, and certain benefits are administered on the federal level. But even despite that large sum of money that corporations are investing in keeping an even playing field among all employees, those companies that offer those benefits are still not underperforming their peers, which is something that I think is really important and really valuable. And so we were really excited to be able to come up with this data point.
Okay, great. So Lance, you're last but not least in this stage setting here. So you represent entertainment, which historically has been very supportive of all of these issues. But tell us about the process of Milk. You won the Academy Award for the screenplay for Milk. Because that took quite a while to get the green light on that project.
Yeah, a lot has changed since Milk. I mean, I think, like Richard said, Hollywood was ahead on this for some time, but there was a real sea change right around 2008, right around Proposition 8. And I'll use Milk as an example and what's happened since. With Milk, trying to get LGBT stories told was about building the business of the film to be able to be worthy of the money and the investment that the studio would put into it. So that meant in order to get something like Milk made, you couldn't just submit a script and have producers that people had faith in to get a green light. You had to then go and package it with enough stars, say, like we went out and got Sean Penn to be in it, James Franco to be in it, Gus Van Sant to direct it. And then folks at the studio would have to put that into their equation and see if this would be a profitable model for a movie. And the gay thing, the gay subject matter, was kind of a strike against you. And so you had to make up for that. So this was a very small budget independent film with big stars, and we sort of barely squeaked in to get made over at Focus, who took a leap of faith because of the financial success they had with Brokeback Mountain. And we were able to get it made, and it made money, and that's been helpful for the future. But things have really changed, I would say, since Proposition 8, and particularly in the last few years in film. Now what's happening is I'm not having to go out there with LGBT stories and package them and in this sort of, I'm sorry that my storyline is a tough one for you, so let me make it financially viable. Now the studios are coming to me. A great example is ABC, a major network, mainstream network, came to me about a year ago and said, we'd like to do a 10-part miniseries on the LGBT movement in America. And it made me very curious. I said, well, things have changed, haven't they? That you're coming to me. And when I asked them why, and we start to dissect it, it became clear. Now, what you want to be, particularly on a network that sells commercials, like What's for Sale on television, the viewers are for sale to the advertisers, aren't they? And so what they really want is to get that ideal viewership to tune in. And to be seen, and that ideal viewership is generally a younger viewership who's setting the trends of what's going to be purchased. And so they want to seem relevant. They want to seem like they're part of what's going on right now. And let's be frank, for this generation, the LGBT rights struggle has been the civil rights struggle of their generation to this point. So really, they're craving relevancy. They're craving this audience. They're saying, we don't want to become the old station. We want to be seen as the young station. We want to be seen as the station of the future. So we better reflect back to this audience what they're experiencing at school and in college, and that's stories about LGBT people. So now they're coming to me. It's a huge sea change. And if you don't mind, I'll take it one step further, which is, you know, this was really refreshing, and it's been exciting to be able to tell LGBT stories and have the support of the networks. But recently, in the past year now, it's gone one step further, and that's, you know, my deep, dark secret, and I know this is going out to the web, so it won't be a secret for long, is that I direct commercials on the side. And I've had 2 major brands come to me looking to do LGBT supportive ads in the past 6 months. One I'm going up to shoot in Vancouver in just a couple of months, because they too want to be seen as a brand of the future, a brand that has that young people won't want to embrace. And so it's become kind of a branding opportunity to be focused on the LGBT community, which is a huge shift from when I was making milk and begging and begging and begging.
But when do you worry, I mean, as activists or business people, I mean, when do you worry about unintended consequences? Because I think we were talking about this on the prep call, that there was a pizzeria in Indiana that was one of these businesses that said, you know, they were going to be protected by this law. They'd had a potential business opportunity to cater a gay wedding, and they said they didn't want to do that, and they had the right not to do that. And there were picketers, and they had to close the pizzeria and shut down. And then on a Facebook campaign, some supporters of this pizzeria launched a Facebook campaign. They raised almost $1 million in support of this business so they could open their doors again. So doesn't that say something about, I mean, do you worry about backlash? Do you, like, is it moving too quickly? Richard, you look like you're ready to.
You know, I don't really worry about backlash. I think that these stories that you hear are so idiosyncratic. I mean, I don't really know what happened in the story of this pizzeria in Indiana, but it sounds a little bizarre. You know, it doesn't really ring true to me, so I think that there's probably something else going on there. And I think that there's been very little backlash. I mean, I think if you look at the states where the issue has either progressed legislatively, or the issue of marriage equality, or progressed through a court decision, that there's been no backlash whatsoever, that people come very quickly to understand that extending equal rights to gay people does not deprive anybody else of their rights, right? You know, famously, Evan Wolfson, one of the founders of the marriage equality movement, says that there's not like a finite number of marriage licenses, right? So if you grant marriage licenses to like gay people, it doesn't mean like they'll all be taken up by the gay people and the straight people won't be able to have them anymore. So I think that that is the kind of the realizations that people very quickly come to, that it doesn't, that there are no opportunity costs whatsoever to treating everybody equally and respecting issues like diversity and inclusion.
Anyone else?
Well, I would just add to that by saying that, if anything, the whole issue today, I think, is best framed by Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, more often than not, all of us know somebody in our lives, all of us. And that's it right there. All of us know somebody. And because all of us know somebody, you know what? This issue is now taken hold in such a way that it's hard to see how, as you put it, that there's a backlash or there are consequences that are negative from it. I think, if anything, it's the other way around.
Well, can I just say also, like, that Matt, I mean, I think the point that Matt just makes is the most important point of all, and that is that the reason why all this is happening is because people like Lance made that movie, and people felt, you know, I mean, it was the movie, but there were many other things, but the movie was a big moment in American cultural history because it you know, it exposed people to this bit of history that made them feel more comfortable with being open and honest with who they are. And you know, I often say that the most important political act you can take as a gay person is to come out if you feel safe, you know.
Right.
But some of the work, I mean, that we've all done in different communities, but you've done on the broader cultural landscape, you know, with some of these movies and some of these commercials. I mean, we should point out that you work on a lot of not gay content, right? You've made a lot of other movies, but Uh,
I'll also say for this pizza owner, this shop, you know, I was recently in Ireland where they have a marriage referendum on the ballot and they have to do an equal time thing. So if someone's pro marriage equality, they have to have anti. And obviously that's not equally proportional to how people feel about marriage in Ireland right now. It's sort of 70% in favor. And the activists there get very angry and I say, no, let them speak, man. Like when you let light shine in on the opposition's arguments, they fold in on themselves. And this pizza shop owner was a good example of that because he went on television and started making the argument that this was somehow a lifestyle choice. And it opened a conversation about whether this was a choice or not, and frankly, whether his heterosexuality was a choice or not. And when we get to the bottom of this choice question, and people realize that this, whatever your sexuality is not something that's easily or changeable at all, that's where we start to really change hearts and minds. People come to see it for what it is. So it actually, you might see it as a slight backlash moment, but I see that blip as an opportunity to shed more light. I actually think it's a good thing.
So there are 28 states, though, you still can be fired for being gay. Right. I mean, so just to be clear about the law. And corporate America may be ahead of that in terms of protections for LGBT people, but there's still only one out gay CEO in the Fortune 500.
he is with an important company, though.
Yes.
A very important company, which is maybe why he felt free to do that.
Probably so.
But talk a little, maybe Nicole, talk a little bit about why that you think that is.
Yeah, and tying that into the conversation we were just having, we're talking about the human case for LGBT equality. The human case is the business case, and the business case is the human case. When you talk about sort of the LGBT rights movement in the business community was led by tech, and Wall Street followed suit, I think you can tie that back to those two industries competing for talent. So if you want the best talent, you want to recruit the best talent, you want to retain the best talent, and you want them to be as productive as possible, you need to let them be themselves. You need to support them. You can't employ people who, if I'm sitting at my desk, my partner can't be on our health insurance, or I have to pay taxes on her health insurance when the person sitting next to me is married to their heterosexual spouse, and that's all covered pre-tax. So the business community realized this, and that's why they're shelling out so much of their own money to make sure that all of their employees are treated equally. At Credit Suisse, we have a really robust non-discrimination policy that's global. So I know for a fact that anyone who works for Credit Suisse in any state that we have an office in the US, as well as in any country around the globe, will be equally protected the same way I am in New York through Credit Suisse. But that said, if I were to move to a state like North Carolina where same-sex marriage is legal, but there are no other protections, my wife and I can go and get, our marriage will be recognized, but yet we can be fired from our jobs if you don't work for Credit Suisse or a company with these protections. You can be denied employment, you can be denied housing, you can be evicted completely legally. So while we talk about same-sex marriage and the arguments yesterday are terrific, we can't lose sight of the fact that that's not the be-all and end-all. There's still a lot that we still need to change in this country. There's 29 states that don't have these protections, and the 60% of LGBT people are living in those states without protections. LGBT people in those states are more likely to be living below the poverty line. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you aren't safe in the workplace, you're probably not able to really earn a living wage. If you can be discriminated against, you can be fired just simply for being who you are, it's much more difficult to earn a living wage and to support a family. So those are things that we still really need to keep in mind. We partnered with the Williams Institute in December. Well, we partnered with them last year on a couple of different pieces, but one piece that was released in December is titled The LGBT Divide, the Other 29 States. And it's a really deep data dive. And again, I'm in finance, I'm a data geek, so it makes me really excited that we have this data. But it paints the picture that the LGBT people who live in the 21 protected states are much more economically successful than the folks who don't live in those states. And so corporate America needs to realize that if we want to be stronger, we need our workforce to be stronger. That's why they're extending these protections where the states are not.
Can I ask, I think that you raised an interesting point about extending these non-discrimination provisions broadly to everywhere you do business, and both your companies, are these big global companies, right? And you are everywhere. You're both everywhere, and I think one of the things that big multinational companies are now going to face is what happens when you are in places. There are places in Africa, there are places in the Middle East that have very harsh penalties for things associated with being LGBT, and you're going to start to come up with people who are going to say, you've guaranteed my protection in this place, and what are you going to do to make good on that? I think that's a real challenge for big companies.
So Credit Suisse, we don't have any offices in those countries, but we certainly don't condone investments in any type of project that would support that. Personally, so I can't talk too much from a Credit Suisse Corporate America side of this, but personally, I'm on the advisory council for an organization called Action Against Hunger, and they are very much present in those areas, and they're focused on fighting hunger, but the LGBT struggle comes into it as well when people don't feel safe. So it is important. It's something that I personally feel strongly about.
Well, I would just say that there are plenty of developed countries where policies are not what they should be. One, it's a challenge for us if we're talking about a family that is going to be discriminated against. We're going to suffer because we're not going to be able to put the people where we want to put them. But if we manage to succeed, we're still going to have a difficult time because we're not just covering, if you will, the country. As a news organization, we're having to, essentially be an advocate, and that is even more uncomfortable. We have to take a
As
position.
journalists,
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
But it is helpful. I mean, one of the stories I found inspirational is when Adobe moved into Utah and was insistent that they have non-discrimination ordinances passed. And it didn't pass statewide, but it certainly passed in the county that they set up shop. And that would not have happened, I don't believe, had there not been this business incentive to pass non-discrimination in one of the most conservative areas in the country.
Well, and this is why the Indiana experience was so amazing. That Mike Pence, who, by some accounts is a very decent guy. I don't know the man personally, but they passed this law, and it was very clear to everybody what the law was intended to be. The law was intended to be a consolation prize to the religious right forces in Indiana, who were worried that when the Supreme Court ruled that Indiana would have to have gay marriage. And then he got up there in the when he was attacked, he got up there in his press conference and he said, no, it was never our intention to discriminate against anybody. And it just wasn't believable. I mean, the man was not telling the truth. Let's be generous. That's about as generous as I can be about it. But the business backlash was so amazing that businesses said that we're not going to do business in Indiana if you let this stand. And within 72 hours, the state legislature in Indiana had revised this bill and taken out the objectionable provisions. Now, there's some back and forth about whether or not they revised it as much as they needed to, but within 72 hours, the business community was able to get a state legislature to change its mind. That was, controlled by a majority party that favored this legislation. It was really miraculous. And what a lot of people in business said to me was like, what can the business community? The business community is fighting for environmental issues. The business community is fighting around immigration issues that they believe are very important. There are political priorities that the business community is unified around, but they can't seem to get the kind of results they got when they spoke out on LGBT rights. So it's really a fascinating case study for business.
Let's talk about the political implications a little bit, since you're raising that, because it's been, at least since the 1980s, I think there's been this coalition of fiscal and social conservatives that have come together and been able to win big elections. It wasn't that long ago gay issues were used as a wedge issue in these big national elections. But does this indicate, what's happening now in the States, does it indicate an unraveling of that type of political alliance? And maybe talk a little bit about the potential implications for the presidential election.
I think it goes way beyond whether you're a liberal or socially liberal. It's so profoundly ultimately about building a better business that you're going to attract people from all kinds of ideological backgrounds, actually. Fiscal conservatives who are prominently pro-gay and lesbian rights, for example. I recall a conversation I had recently with the CEO of Delta Airlines, which obviously is a big company, and Delta is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, which is not, as you know, historically been such a kind and gentle state to gay and lesbian rights. And he's a Roman Catholic. And he has been as determined and vocal at a cost, too, by the way, on this issue, because he says, hey, I'm trying to build the best airline in America, and there's only one way to do that, and that's not to embrace any kind of discriminatory policy.
Richard?
I think that, well, I was just thinking about that, about Delta. I don't know if I can reevaluate my travel plans. Tell me, what was the question? What were you? I was so struck by Matt's answer, I lost track of the question.
You were talking about the political implications of this, and my question was about the alliance between
about
fiscal and social.
and around the election, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are two schools of thought, right? I think there are a lot of people in the Republican Party. Well, you know, the Republican Party is split, right? They're split on this issue, like they are on many issues. There's a old New England Republican wing, and then you know, that's fiscally conservative but culturally moderate, and then there's the newer Republicans who are quite, in my view, extreme on social issues. And you know, how this split will play itself out in the party is what we're all watching in terms of the upcoming election. But you know, many people believe that what the Republican Party would like was the Supreme Court to rule, and they get the issue behind them, and then the Republicans can say, well, it's a non-issue, the court has spoken, let's move on. But my own view, now I'm a Democrat, I worked for the president, and I'm a supporter of Secretary Clinton's, so I give that little caveat. I mean, I think that the Democrats, and I think especially Hillary Clinton, are going to raise this issue, and I think they're going to pound the Republican Party with it as much as they can. And I think, you know, we heard in Mike Allen's panel Monday morning that the #1 issue that Republican strategists are concerned with in the upcoming presidential election is that they will be hurt and will look like extremists because their party opposes marriage equality. And I think that I think that once again these issues will play themselves out in a pretty big way in the campaign. I mean, Lance, do you agree? I mean, you follow this as closely as I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be cause for concern, because you look at the data on young conservatives and even young evangelicals, and now those are showing that young evangelicals and conservatives are in favor of marriage equality. So, you know, if you're talking about the youth vote,
youth vote, right?
If the youth vote shows up, you're in real trouble, because you're going to lose. You're at risk of losing that because of your stance on marriage equality. You know, that said, I get into a place where I get in trouble often by saying that I think it's critical and to take this debate for LGBT equality out of the red-blue divide. It's something, even though I don't agree with the man that we hired to lead the case against Proposition 8 on so many issues, I think it was a coup when we brought on Theodore Olson to lead the case against Proposition 8. And that he could make in Newsweek the conservative case for marriage equality. So, you know, we're throwing the doors open in the gay and lesbian community for conservatives to say, come on in. We might not agree with you on everything, but there is a conservative case to be made for LGBT equality. You know, and to have conservatives out there talking the language of conservatives about LGBT families is really, really critically important. So, you know, the door's open. So I don't like to say us or them. I'm saying, hey, if you've got a problem, come on in, guys. I just am not hearing it from the candidates that have stepped forward so far. In fact, quite the opposite if you read what they're saying, even some of those who pretend to be a bit more progressive. I'm not hearing it.
Well, and the problem, right, is trying to win these Republican primaries because you know, I know a lot of people who know Jeb Bush and who've worked with him, and people who know him say that they would be very surprised if in his heart of hearts that he really had any problem with marriage equality. And in fact, when marriage equality was passed in Florida recently, he had a very kind of down the middle statement that he put out that said, you know, we have to respect people on both sides. And I think that, you know, Lance alludes to it. I think that's one of the reasons why the movement has been so successful, right? Because I think that you know, we've decided to have an open door to everybody, to respect differences. And I think I don't want to keep going back to this pizza guy, right? But the pizza owner, you know, I mean, really makes a false case. So I think that we should say in all of this that that we who have been in the gay rights movement for a long time, that we take the principle of religious liberty very seriously, and that just like equal protection and just like equality, religious liberty is one of the fundamental principles on which the country is based. But those two principles of religious liberty and equality have been able to coexist for a long time in this country, and we've been able to find the right balance. So for instance, in none of these states where we have marriage equality would any church or religious determination be required to perform an actual marriage. We're really talking just about the civil law. So I think when churches or any kind of religious denomination has an actual religiously based objection, a valid, valid. I mean, it's valid in that it's actually based in a deeply held religious principle, that we respect those principles. And if people don't want to extend their particular version of something based upon a religious principle, that's totally fine. It's just when people say, well, I don't want to serve Nicole or Lance pizza, right? No one wants to deny you pizza.
First off,
Thank
who
God.
was ordering pizza for their wedding anyway?
I
I want to kick this, I don't like this gay. I don't know who this person was. But
You mean which gay person is ordering pizza?
Yeah,
for
which
their
gay
wedding?
person is ordering pizza for their wedding?
Doesn't know how to have a wedding.
That's not right. That's not right. I will make one, I just sort of, this is less about information and kind of a more of an appeal to business owners when we talk about things like employment non-discrimination. I think people think this is just about making sure that people can keep their jobs. And I had a conversation with an openly gay congressman who said, well, why are we so worried about this anyway? Are gays really being fired? Are they really being thrown out of their homes? I said, well, some. But the real thing that happens when there aren't protections is that gay and lesbian folks at work can't be openly gay or lesbian. They can't bring their partner to the work party. They can't be out about the children that they're having and the families they're raising. And the real problem there is that they can't tell their stories. They can't dispel the sort of myths and the lies and the stereotypes and the fears around LGBT issues. One fear being that somehow gays are all against religion, which is where a lot of these debates come from, that we could dispel that myth. There is such a thing as an LGBT person of faith, and so it's really, I think, diabolical. It's sort of not passing INDA is like building a giant closet.
But let's dig into that a little bit, because I think that's an interesting, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate, because I hear this conversation about women too in leadership and moving up the ranks and how to get to the upper echelons, and keeping in mind there's one out gay CEO at the at any Fortune 500 company. So if you could talk a bit about personally what it's like being a gay person at work and how you're, how you find that, because it seems to me the conversation is sort of similar with women that a lot of the success that gay people have had, LGBT people have had in corporate America has been around assimilation and convincing, Joe Blow colleague that they're just like them and they're the same. And I'm wondering though if something is getting lost in that type of assimilation. That is there more to learn about diversity and people who are outside the norm? I mean, are we losing something in that?
Well, I would just say all companies that are thinking about this are going in the direction of the more diverse we can be, the more competitive we can be. And so we have to look diverse and be diverse. Mm-hmm. And so if you have the same people who look alike, sound alike in the same room, that's a bad sign. You don't want to perpetuate that. And so from top to bottom and everything in between, you want to be as diverse as possible, which obviously includes anything related to sexual orientation, but it includes everything, gender balance, race, ethnicity, everything. And so companies today, if they're thinking about how to be better and how to be more competitive, are really focused on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And to touch on the point about women and how this sort of parallels, we did a study last year. We took the 3,000 companies that we cover globally, and dug down on what percentage of leadership is female versus male. So we want to step beyond just women represented on boards and dug down more into the ranks of senior leadership beyond the board level. And what we found is that companies with more women on the board outperform companies with, or more women in leadership outperform companies with fewer. And it's not just if you have one woman, you outperform companies without any women. If you have 20 people, 20 women in leadership versus 0, you have the same performance as 1. It actually increases. So the more women that you have in leadership, the better your company outperforms. The study's called the Gender 3000. I'm pretty sure it's available online from our website if people want to look into that. So I don't remember all of the statistics off the top of my head. But it does show that just based on that diversity, just gender diversity can improve a company's performance. And then when you talk about LGBT diversity, I think that also is really important as well, because going back to what I said earlier about the level of talent that you have in your company, you want everyone to feel comfortable being themselves so that they can do their job to the best of their ability. If they're pretending to be someone that they're not, if they're pretending to date men, for a gay woman is pretending that she goes on dates with men, or not telling people about her wife at home or the kid that she's expecting, she's expending a lot of mental energy keeping those things separate. So she's not going to be as productive, she's not going to be as strong of an employee as if she could just be honest and wouldn't have to worry about which pronoun she was using when she talked about her weekend. So those things are really important, and I think the more people who come out, the more comfortable other people will be coming out. I struggled for a while personally about telling my story. I didn't think it was really relevant, but what I found is that telling the personal story coupled with the data is what's going to help policymakers make decisions. So I think it is really important for me to talk about my experience and how I was really worried when I came out. I had no idea how people were going to think of me, personally, professionally, everything else. And it's important to let other people know that luckily nothing negative happened to me.
So Nicole, what gave you the courage to do that? I mean, what was happening at the company that indicated to you that was a safe thing to do?
Well, for me, I knew I was gay when I was about 4, but I didn't know what gay was. I didn't know any gay people, and so I just kind of kept that little secret to myself until I was 26. And finally, when I was 26, I realized, okay, this is crazy. I can't keep going out to bars and trying to meet guys because I have absolutely zero interest. And so I came out personally and professionally at the same time. So the struggle was coming out to myself first, and that took a while to really become comfortable with it. I stumbled over the words so many times. And then when I came out personally, I knew that I wouldn't be good at hiding this from my colleagues because I socialize with my colleagues pretty regularly. And so I knew I needed to come out at work pretty much concurrently. And so I told my manager, and he was supportive. And about the same time, I received an email from our LGBT employee resource group. The whole firm did. They did an open meeting, so they wanted to just let employees know that we had an employee resource group. They were having a meeting, and if you're curious about what they did or being involved, you should attend.
You probably thought they were just sending it to you, right?
I was like, how did they know?
How did they?
Where's Big Brother? So I went to the meeting, and it was terrific, and I joined the community service subcommittee, so working with LGBT nonprofits. So, and up until then, I should also caveat this, that although I was a founding member of our Gay Straight Alliance at my high school as a straight ally, because we had no gay members of the Gay Straight Alliance. After that, I pretty much, it was all the closeted gay people. In hindsight, it was actually. But after that, I kept the LGBT community at more than arm's length, because the more I came to realize that I was gay, the more afraid I was by being outed, and I was really worried about guilt by association. So I didn't go to any of the LGBT meetings before that. But once I came out and I felt comfortable, I was very nervous. I'm sure my palms were sweating going to that meeting, and actually walking in and talking about my girlfriend for the first time with work colleagues who weren't people that I knew well. But it was great, and the organization, our network, has grown and it's become stronger and stronger, and my co-chair is in the room here today. And so now I feel comfortable, and now I understand the importance of me talking about being gay and talking about my wife and my baby who turned 1 month today, so that other people feel comfortable coming out and being themselves and being real contributors to the bank and bringing their different perspective. Mm-hmm. Not trying to assimilate, not trying to think the way the person next to them thinks, but actually just thinking the way they think. So take it down very
well, I would just say that, I think your question is a fascinating one, and everybody who's had this experience personally has a different kind of story. I was a young associate in a law firm in New York City, I'm quite a bit older than Nicole, but you know, I was not, when I was starting my career as a lawyer, I was not really that comfortable being out in the, at work, even though I was out, you know, in my private life. And it took a while, and I had the experience of working in politics, which I think in the 90s was a much more welcoming place, and it was also more of a public place, so you had to be sort of more public about everybody, about who you were, and it was President Clinton. I mean, it was only in 1992 when President Clinton, by executive order, removed the rule that said that you couldn't get a security clearance if you were openly gay. And so when I was appointed to the White House staff in 1993, it was only as a result of the fact that he changed the regulation. I mean, he didn't change it just for me, but he changed it for a group of people that I was a part of. And we think that this is, you know, I mean, that's pretty recent history, right? That the rule up until 1992 was that you could not get a top security clearance if you were openly gay. And so, I mean, by that account, I guess we've made a lot of progress since then. But even recently, I mean, I think you, Katie, you alluded a little bit to kind of the subtlety of some of this issue. You know, I mean, I'm quite active. In addition to my job at GLG, where I'm head of public affairs and marketing and communications and external affairs, you know, where we're interested in a range of policy issues, and it's my job to represent the company on all the policy issues that it's concerned with in Washington and in state capitals. You know, I'm very, you know, if you Google me, I mean, the first thing comes up is my work around gay rights. And I remember when I was being interviewed, I was having the final interview for this job 2 years ago with our CEO, Alexander St. Amand. And even I, you know, who've been in this movement for a long time, felt compelled to say to him, you know, I thought he was about to offer me this job. And I felt compelled to say to him, you know, don't worry. If I come work for you, I'll figure out a way to either tap this stuff down or do it in such a way that the company is comfortable with. And he like stopped me right there. He said, stop. And then there was this long silence, and he says, the reason why we want to hire you is one of the biggest reasons we want to hire you is because this is what you're doing. And because this speaks to your character, and this speaks to the kind of advocate we know you will be for us. And I think a lot of companies are having that experience, but it is so he said, don't stop it. He said, as a matter of fact, do more of it. But I think this is, you know, this is kind of the next experience that a lot of us who have been involved in this struggle are having. I mean, you wouldn't not hire someone because they've been active in the African American civil rights movement, or if they've been active in any kind of other social movement and had a distinguished career in it. But they're still, you know, we're still, in some ways, we've come a long way, but in other ways, we're at our infancy.
It's interesting, you know, he was an intern at Bloomberg News.
Was he? Yeah.
So
How'd he do?
Did great.
Okay, good. I'll tell him you said that.
Okay, I think we're about ready to open it up to questions. If anyone wants to, we have, mics. Do me a favor, when you're asking a question, just say your name and where you're from.
Sure, I'm Josh Barrow with the New York Times. It seems to me like corporate interest in gay rights has been driven largely by companies' employee and customer bases who are gay, and therefore they've had a tendency to look at the issue through the prism of their relatively affluent and empowered employee and customer bases, with marriage sort of as the centerpiece of those concerns. So as the gay marriage issue looks likely to move off the table in the next few months, what can be done to get corporations to focus on issues of concern to less enfranchised parts of the LGBT community, and particularly to focus on trans rights?
Well, I mean, I have some ideas. I mean, I think that after the Supreme Court rules in June, and if it rules as we expect, I think that the shift we will see in terms of the policy debate will be very much, as Josh suggests, towards transgender rights issues, and perhaps even more importantly, towards global issues of equality and the like, expanding the issues, seeing this issue really as a basic human rights issue rather than a sexual orientation issue outside the U.S. And I think that shareholders have a very, in publicly traded companies, I think shareholders, especially large pension funds and the like, have a very important role to play in holding big companies accountable, as Nicole referenced, to make sure that their policies are the same everywhere, but also making sure that that big companies hold governments accountable. We saw in Uganda, which passed and then rescinded a very repressive group of gay laws, and I think that it was the British companies, the British conglomerates, that still do a lot of work in Uganda, together with the efforts of the State Department, the U.S. State Department, got them to repeal that law. So I think that's one avenue, and I think that you know, employees who may be more affluent, or you know, have a role to play as inside agitators. Agitators is perhaps not the right word, but as inside advocates for these issues. And I think, you know, I think we'll see that.
Next question. Beth, there's a microphone. Yeah. Oh, did you have a question? Okay, you and then Beth. Yeah.
Sumit Goel, High Point Associates. You referred to being in politics and being one of the more forward-thinking industries. You could probably name a few others. I was curious, given where we are today, are there industries that you would identify as being behind the curve, if we can turn that a little bit, where you see more challenges versus ones that have gotten further along, whether politics, media, entertainment, et cetera?
Well, I think that the companies that, I mean, the latest Human Rights Campaign Equality Index, I think, showed that of the big companies, even in the Fortune 20, I think it was either well over 50% of the Fortune 20 are scoring right at 100%. So that means not only do they have the, you know, inclusive policies, but they're advocating for LGBT rights. So I think all of the big companies, no matter what sector you're in, have really come along. ExxonMobil may be perhaps the only company in big oil that's been kind of slow to warm up on this. But even the big oil companies have pretty much come around. I think that what we see is some of the companies that started in the South, or some of the companies that have founders, you know, some of the companies that have still have strong founders that are running them, even though they've become publicly traded companies, may be slow to come on board. There was a couple of years ago that whole controversy around Chick-fil-A, which is, you know, now a big company. They have a lot of franchisees. You know, Chick-fil-A is a company run by a family still that has, you know, deeply held religious beliefs. But even they don't try to deny anybody access to their Chick-fil-A sandwiches based upon their sexual orientation. So I think pretty much everybody's coming around. I should also say that Josh Barrow, you know, asked the previous question, has done a lot of great work in the New York Times writing about this. And so I highly recommend his writing to you on this topic generally.
Great. Next question.
This is really more of a comment than a question, but I was struck by all the references to the entertainment industry. I was in the entertainment industry for 25 years, and I can assure you that back when I was in it, you probably weren't even born then, when I started. I was very young. There was a great deal of homophobia. And and so we've been talking about the need for businesses to be cognizant of their customers and what can drive certain policies. What led it in the entertainment industry, and I'd like, you know, it's not because we were all better people. It was talent. It was the competition for talent. And I remember when Philadelphia was made in 1993, and that was driven because certain people like Tom Hanks were saying, we want to do this movie. And it was that competition that drove, and I'm only speaking on the production side, the studio side, to say, oh, we got to back down. Now, there was a certain openness anyway, just because working in the creative world, it goes to the point of everybody knows somebody. If you work in the creative world, you know a lot of people. But that was really the driving force. So the lesson I think from that is not to overlook the fight for talent, the competition for talent, be it outside talent, like in business, like in the film world, or your key competitors. I'm sorry, your key employees, and the fight among, and I think that's going to be, especially as I see my own children, I have I have early 20s kids, for them this is like so not an issue. I mean, they find it incomprehensible that anyone would discriminate. So they're not going to go work for anybody who isn't totally open to this. So anyway.
Well, let's not let Hollywood off the hook since we're in its backyard.
Let's not.
No, I'm not.
And if we want to pinpoint a couple of places where there is still homophobia and actually a resistance to diversity in general, two places. One, in the writers' rooms. In the writers' rooms in Hollywood, particularly for television shows where we're crafting as a team the stories, it's still predominantly white, male, heterosexuals. And you can see that reflected in sort of how diversity is depicted on television. And I think if you ask a lot of people who are minorities in one way or another, if that depiction was accurate, they'll say, not really, not my experience.
Latino and black writers would totally be there.
So you know,
and women.
It is one way in which I hope the market drives writers' room to become more diverse, so that those depictions in proportion, but also in how they're depicted, better reflect the diverse audience that these networks are trying to appeal to. The second place where I would say Hollywood has some work to do is in the agent and managers of talent, actors in particular. I get zero resistance from the studios, from producers or directors when looking to hire openly gay talent. You go and make a phone call to agents and managers in this town looking for them, and they'll say everyone we represent is straight.
Well, but why is it? Do you think there's still a fear among big Hollywood stars to come out?
I find it less and less with the actors themselves, and more an encouragement by the management, who has oftentimes invested years in talent, invested a lot of
managers
money
keep them in the closet,
time, cultivating talent, finding them, putting them through the audition process, doing all this stuff, and what they see is and it's particularly older and oftentimes gay management who have an outdated idea of the profitability of an openly gay actor or actress. And they say, you know, it's a safer bet to just keep you in the closet. And
that still happens.
And that still happens.
Who does it happen with?
You're cute. You know, I do my best to encourage, like, the young actors I know coming up who are saying, I'm being encouraged to be closeted, to come out. And I also say it's not just a political thing, it's probably good for your career. In this day and age, I think it's a problem that is going to wane, because these young people who are very talented have been out in one way or another on Facebook or Twitter, and none of that's going away.
And also for the same reason Nicole says, right? I mean, because if you're out as an actor, you're going to be a better actor.
I would think.
I actually think that is true, and frankly, that's a really good observation there.
Thank you.
The closeted, I don't know a lot of, I don't know, frankly, any closeted actors who are very good, because they do come across as wooden. They come across as inauthentic and like there's something that they're hiding. And you see...
Well, that eliminates a couple of people to my previous question.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. But, you know, those are... I think management agencies and writers' rooms need a lot of work in Hollywood still.
Well, in talking about the younger generation, too, what's really interesting is the younger generation, when we're out recruiting on campus, the straight allies are more interested in what our HR policies are for LGBT employees than out students, which I think is really interesting. So the younger folks, when they're coming out of college, they want to make sure that they're working for an organization that doesn't discriminate. So that's something that's really interesting, I thought. And some folks, there was a study earlier, I don't remember exactly what it was, but who did it, but there was a study that came out that said that younger generation people are more likely to go in the closet when they go into the workforce. And I want to say that was true from maybe 2004 to 2008, and I think that's when the study was focused on. But I think that's changed a lot now. And at Credit Suisse, we actually we have a program where we bring young folks who are entering MBA school who are out to Credit Suisse to learn what an investment bank is and to show them that we have out employees, it's okay to be out. We coach them on how to be out effectively on your resume. You know, there's certain things that you want to talk about and, you know, maybe not the toga party or whatever the case. But we focus on helping them show who they are and being out in the process and making sure that they feel comfortable with it. So
Deloitte
the
actually
next
did a
generation's
piece of research, I don't know if it was Deloitte you were thinking of, about that younger people coming in the workforce tend to be out in bigger numbers, but as they move up in the ranks and move into more senior levels, they start to cover again.
Yeah,
so-
and that's what the piece is called.
Yeah, covering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
covering, right.
Who else has a question? Back here. Do we have a microphone? I think this has to be our last question, unfortunately.
I'm Mark Chamberlain from MSO Partners. I just would be curious to hear what you all think about the Bruce Jenner interview last week. I guess my observation is there's a lot of work still to do with the trans community, and surprisingly and discouragingly, in my own life, at work and in my personal life, it seems like people have made a lot of snarky comments about that. I was really discouraged to hear. Be curious what the panel thinks.
I absolutely loved it on many levels. The first of which was going to my trans friends, some who are at different places in their journey, and universally it was tears, and it was, I woke up happier this morning, and you know, one person I work with in particular came to work and didn't have her breast bound for the first time, wasn't hiding. And so I think just the sort of liberation of a nation that's a bit more educated for trans folks is helpful. And then I'll say something probably slightly controversial, because I put this on my Facebook and got beat up. His other revelation that he was Republican, I was thrilled about. I'm not conservative, but I thought, you know what? Here is a guy who will be able, a conservative trans person, a woman, sorry, not a guy, a conservative trans woman who can go and speak to conservatives about who she is. In that language, in the conservative language, make the conservative case for understanding inequality. And I just think that we broke down a couple barriers that night because of that. So I know there's been snarky stuff because a lot of people from the left have been rather upset that she revealed herself as a Republican. But I think in the long run, it's helpful
They
for all
didn't
of us.
object. They didn't object to her being trans. They objected to the fact that she was Republican.
It was the big on CNN. The headline wasn't Bruce Jenner comes out as a woman. It was Bruce Jenner comes out as a Republican. That was the headline.
That's actually a nice note to end on, I think. The broader point was very nice. So I want to thank the panelists so much for being here with us. It was a really important discussion. Thank you for coming.